Equality between women and men has been clearly identified as one of the causes blocking development over the last 2 decades. It is often difficult to establish evidence-based causal links between impact of gender inequality on a country's development because of the lack of available sex disaggregated data. Gender inequality is often driven by existing gender stereotypes that determine how we perceive the roles of women and men in society. Millions of girls and women today are disempowered by the simple biological process of menstruation for lack of affordable sanitary pads and cultural practices in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. They are limited to social life and stigmatized during the period of menstruation. The ripple effect is that young girls across the region are forced to skip school or drop out of school.
The issue of sanitary pads for rural and peri-urban area in Ghana, not just Ghana but the whole of Africa, is really a challenge. My problem or my challenge when I look at from this perspective, I think that when we're talking about gender inequality, this is one of the root cause, because if the boy is all the time in school and the girl loses 5 days in the school in a month, you can multiply that by a year and see how many days the girl absent from school. And the reason is just simple, because they cannot afford the sanitary pads, or some of them has never seen it, or their parents have never used it, neither have they have the time to even educate them, and because of that they don't go to school. The elderly one who are staying home, and in my kingdom where I come from, you are considered dirty, and therefore you have to stay out of where people are. In some of these African spiritual churches, you are considered also unclean, and for that matter you do not come to the house of worship. So you are exempted from all the basic social activities.
According to the United Nations Children's Fund 2007 report, a girl in primary school loses approximately 18 weeks out of 108 school weeks in 3 years. A girl in high school loses 156 learning days, which is equivalent to almost 24 weeks out of the 144 school weeks. In Ghana, women, and especially rural women, still suffer from all sorts of ailments that are associated with the menstrual process. A large number of these girls, many of them from impoverished rural families, usually opt to stay at home during their monthly periods as they cannot afford the regular sanitary pads manufactured by large consumer goods companies. Most of these girls go through menstrual periods very secretively and don't really bother to find out if their practices are hygienic or not. At times, they may wear the same unhygienic sanitary pad for a whole day because they don't have enough money to buy a hygienic sanitary pad. Some resort to the use of tattered cloth, rags, papers and leaves that puts them at a risk of all kinds of infections that can even lead to death. The University of Oxford study in Ghana on impact of providing sanitary pads to poor girls in Africa in 2009 shows that girls used cloth or toilet roll because pads were unaffordable.
Its impact on their education is not something that is isolated to the Nkwanta South District, because there are reports. I think research has even suggested that about 65% of girls in Ghana also don't attend school when they are menstruating because they don't have access to pad, and they fear that when they go to school and they stain their dresses, boys will laugh at them. And so coming to our context here, definitely most parents don't even know why they should buy sanitary pads for their girls. And so they feel so reluctant to go to school. Definitely, and that affects them. And that means that the girl child will be absenting from school for some days when she is menstruating. And I think that that issue is very serious, especially when we are talking about gender equality and you see the girls absenting themselves because of sanitary pad issues. So I think that everybody must be on board, parents must be on board. They must understand that times have changed and they need to be holistically responsible.
Because cloth is scarce, girls usually had only 2 or 3 pieces and so ended up by wearing damp cloth much of the time. Some girls even share clothes with their mother or sisters, increasing the potential for negative health effects. According to the research findings, girls in rural remote areas of Ghana stay at home the entire length of their menstrual periods due to fear of soiling themselves in the presence of others. The usual practice was to use discarded cloths, which do not offer sufficient protection. A good number of female school children fail to report to school when they are in their menses because they cannot afford sanitary pads. This leads to poor performance and increased likelihood of dropouts. A research conducted by UNICEF in 2003 showed that school dropout rate among girls in deprived areas was rife because they could not manage themselves well during menstruation due to lack of sanitary facilities.
I remember that when you go into some community, you find places where women are using rag, they wash it, they dry it behind the latrine. Flies settle on it, they come in the morning, they pick it and use it. The girls sew their own by themselves, use it the whole day in school, come back, wash it, and if it's not dry, they repeat using the same thing. And we felt that this is really uncalled for, especially in this 21st century.
The UNICEF study pointed out that once these girls drop out of school for lack of affordable sanitary pads, they are exposed to the incidence of early marriage and early childbirth, increasing the incidence of gender inequality. The use of unhygienic materials by these women and girls to address the menstrual conditions is largely responsible for infection and maternal health complications, along with embarrassment and low self-esteem.
But some of the girls themselves will tell you that once their parents are not able to afford it, teachers buy for them. And we all know that there's no free lunch anywhere in this world, and so once teachers are buying for them, and teachers also ask for sexual favors, they will give in. And maybe they can become pregnant, they can even contract diseases and things like that. And so my appeal to parents is that they should be more responsible for their children.
Increased education for girls in developing countries is associated with a number of important positive health, social, and economic outcomes for a community. Education of young women presents a dynamic opportunity for females to build sustainable careers and livelihood, but the events of menarche constitute a major barrier for continued school attendance and performance, as well as one of the root causes of gender inequality.
We're looking at the poorest regions, the poorest community, the poorest rural areas, and then we'll start from there. And we are not going to end only in Ghana. We want to make sure that the whole sub-region is covered, because luckily enough, I've worked with a network called the West African Network for Child Protection, and I coordinate for Ghana. And we have received children from all over the sub-region who are Ghanaians, young migrants, and vulnerable children who have been trafficked. Vice versa, we also identify children from this community who themselves are also victims to these stigmatizations.
A recent study by global information and measurement company AC Nielsen stated that 68% of rural women cannot afford sanitary pads. Even though there have been some interventions in few communities, there's still a significant need for clean, low-cost, biodegradable sanitary pads for school-going girls in low-income communities in Ghana.
The good news is that we have on our own as an organization, we did a lot of research to see how best we can address this issue. And it's simply because we've been working in rural areas, reintegrating vulnerable children, supporting them in their school and so on. And we've come to identify a device, a simple machine that we can produce sanitary pads for these rural women. and these rural girls. We are not reinventing the wheel. It's already in India and they are using it. So we're bringing the machine to use our local cotton and use our plantain fiber to produce the sanitary pad, which will be basically biodegradable, and it will be shared at a very token fee, very little fee, just for the way of sustainability to these girls in the rural area so that they can go to school regularly.
Research and Counseling for African Migrants, RECFAM, producer of PridePad, is uniquely positioned to enter and dominate this menstruation issue while providing a vital societal benefit to the female population.
We want to look at some of the communities that the farmers themselves grew a lot of plantain and bananas. And then we'll look at the other places where, like the northern region, where they grew the cottons. So we'll place each of the machines there so that they will start harvesting their cotton. We'll buy it, we'll extract the fiber from the plantain, and so on and so forth. And then we will start it in each and every community based on the statistic.
RECFAM, throughout its works, has received very positive reception from parents and some schools in rural and suburban areas in Ghana about supplying PridePads directly through schools for sale at low cost to students.
I think one of the challenge, I would say, that when the government of Ghana started this initiative, the approach was really wrong. Because this is really a need, it's not a want. The children need it. You cannot go for a loan of 156 million and 2.5 million was to go to school, to buy sanitary pad to distribute. For how long will you buy sanitary pad to distribute to the schoolgirls? At least, and per the newspaper we all read here and there, it was like a pilot thing for a number of months. So after that, what happened? Our initiative is different because we are bringing the machine in the country. We are going to produce it in the country. We are going to employ women who will be working in the country. We will take this sanitary pad to them in the rural area. Very cheap, very affordable, biodegradable, easy to dispose.
For schools that cannot afford to absorb the cost, RECFAM's non-profit wing will solicit for grants or raise funds from individuals and corporate bodies to produce and distribute the sanitary pads freely to the targeted schools and non-student girls and women in these low-income communities.
We are not politicians. We are just a non-profit organization. We don't want to go into politics, but we felt that the approach the government used was totally wrong, because I will not see you putting $2.5 million US in way of supporting children in school, whether in the sanitary pad, their books, or whatever they were being used for, just for a short period of time. So that's why our intervention is different. And then to talk of, we have already been talking with the Ministry of Education. We've gone to the Ghana Education Service. They welcomed the idea and they felt that this is the right approach. And I remember even talking to one of the directors, he even said one of his classmates dropped out of school because they could not afford sanitary pad, and up to today she has never educated herself. So if all this, they have all this information, and looking at also the Ministry of Gender coming in to say that this is something that they should support, and it was very frustrating on her own part to see that people tend to politicize everything which is the basic need for schoolgirl. So our intervention is unique, it is a social need, and we want to make sure that it is creating employment for the women. That's bringing equality also in the society. It's going to be very cheap, very affordable, biodegradable, easy to dispose.
PridePad napkins will be produced using all local raw natural biodegradable materials, cotton and banana fiber, by locals, mostly females, using existing technology imported from India. The first production facility is currently under construction in Accra, Ghana. RECFAM's social enterprise is to sell the products at a much reduced price to girls in schools for sustainability purposes. It is expected that within 18 months, the number of girls attending school will increase with no record of absence or dropout due to their inability to afford sanitary pads. PridePad's factory will be established throughout Ghana by the end of year 5, with women in low-income communities producing the sanitary pads for their own communities.